Let's look at a few examples of circles in terms of conic equations. So remember, a circle is just a special case of an ellipse where it's been stretched vertically and horizontally the same amount. So it's uniform in its shape. What we want to be able to do is either take the graph or some information about the circle and then identify the center and the radius and then sketch its graph. Or flip that around, we want to be able to take its graph, figure out the center and the radius, and then write the equation. Okay. So in this first example, we're given a graph. We want to identify the center and the radius and then write its equation. Well, the standard equation for a circle is x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals r squared. Okay. The center and the radius, those are the two key characteristics of a circle. They're the two pieces of information that describe what the circle looks like. The center, from our equation, the center is the value of h, comma, the value of k. So that's our x and y coordinate. And the radius is just the r value. So, and then notice in the equation it's r squared, so we need to figure out what r is going to be. So in the graph that we have this circle, and the maybe 4 nice points on the circle would be the furthest left, furthest right, furthest top and bottom points on the circle. And so it passes through the 4 points at 3, -3, -1, +1, -5, -3, and -1, -7. So those are the four nice points that we can easily read off the circle. And once we see where those 4 points are, if you kind of looked at the horizontal and vertical line that passed through those 4 points, we can see where they intersect is going to be at the circle. Okay, so if we look at the horizontal and vertical lines passing through those 4 points, we can see where the circle is going to be centered at. And so in this case, those two lines intersect at the point -1, -3. And so that's going to be the center of our circle. If we want to figure out the radius, it's just the distance from the center to any one of those 4 points. So we can pick any 4 we want. Let's just say it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 units outwards from the center to one of those points. So the radius has to be 4. So we're going to plug the -1 in for x, or in for h. We're going to plug in the -3 in for the k, and the 4 in for the r. So we're going to have the quantity x minus a -1 squared plus the quantity y minus a -3 quantity squared, and that's going to equal 4 squared. Minus a negative becomes a positive, right? So we're going to have the quantity x plus 1 squared plus the quantity y plus 3 quantity squared, and that's equal to 16. And so that's the standard equation of our circle, having a radius at -1, -3, or sorry, having a center at -1, -3, and a radius of 4. And remember, the x plus 1 means it's been moved horizontally to the left 1 unit, and the y plus 3 means it's been moved vertically in the direction down, a direction a unit of 3 units, so -3 in the y direction. All right, let's look at another example. This time we're going to start with the equation. We want to figure out the center and the radius, and then we want to sketch its graph. So we're given the equation x minus 2 quantity squared plus y plus 1 quantity squared is equal to the 9. So to find our center, we want to look at the x and the value that's next to the x and the y. So we have x minus 2. Flip the sign. So x minus 2, we're going to have a positive 2. Y plus 1, we're going to have a -1. So our center is at positive 2, comma, -1. And our radius, remember the equation is equal to r squared. So that means r squared is equal to 9, which means our radius r is equal to 3. So our center is at 2, -1. The radius is 3. We now want to sketch the graph of the circle. So we're going to start with our center. It's at 2, -1. And then I'm going to go from the center 3 units to the right, to the left, up, and down. And that will give me those 4 points. So right 3 units, that's going to put me at 5, -1. We're going to go up 3 units. That's going to be at 2, 2. We're going to go left 3 units. So that's going to be at -1, -1. And then we're going to go down 3 units. So that's going to be 2, -4. And so that gives me 4 points. And I can just connect a nice circle going around through those 4 points. Okay, and that's what our circle is going to look like. All right, let's do one more example. This time we're not given the equation or the graph, we're given information about the circle. We are told that we have a circle, and the endpoints of the diameter are at the coordinate 4, -4, 9, and at the coordinate 10, -3. So we want to write the equation. So to write the equation, you need to know the center and the radius. So let me just try and sort of draw what this is going to look like. So we'll draw our x and our y axes. And I know one endpoint of our diameter is at -4 and 9. And I know the other endpoint is at 10, -3. So the diagonal line from -4, 9 to 10, -3, that's the diameter of the circle. And so our circle is just, again, we can kind of draw a circle around. And again, I didn't draw that real nice, but it's a sketch, right? We're not looking for a perfect drawing here. I know that the center of the circle has to be in the middle of that diameter. So it's going to be somewhere around here, somewhere probably in the first quadrant of our circle or of our XY plane. And then the radius is the distance from either one of those endpoints to the center. Or you could think of the radius as being the length of the diameter divided by 2. So how do we figure out the diameter length or the radius length, and how do we figure out the coordinates for the center? There are several ways we could do this. We could use the midpoint formula to find the center. So the midpoint would have the form where you would take an x and y coordinate, where the x coordinate is the average of x1 and x2. So it's x plus 1, or x1 plus x2, and all that's divided by 2. And then the y coordinate would be basically the same thing, y1 plus y2, all that divided by 2. So that's the midpoint formula, and that we could use that to find the center. And then we could find the length of the diameter using the distance formula. And so the distance formula, remember, d is equal to the square root of a big quantity, and inside we're going to have x2 minus x1, quantity squared, plus y2 minus y1, quantity squared. So we could do that. We could use the midpoint formula to find the center, and we could use the distance formula to find the diameter, and then once you have the diameter, you can find the radius. Or we could also try to picture this just in terms of some right triangle trig. Okay, so if I were to draw a line, a vertical line, down from one endpoint, from the top endpoint, and a horizontal line through the bottom endpoint. So I have one line that's y equals a -3, and the other line is x equals a -4, right? That creates this right triangle, from where the ends of the right triangle, the ends of the hypotenuse of the right triangle, are the 2 points that were given. What is the length of that vertical side and horizontal side? Well, the vertical side travels from a -3 up to 9. So how far is it from -3 to 9? That's a distance of 12. And then what about the horizontal side of the triangle? So that's going from a -4 to 10. So how far is it from -4 to 10? That's a distance of 14. Okay. So with that, I could go ahead and figure out what the length of the diameter is, right? The length of the diameter would just be the length of the hypotenuse. So I could use the Pythagorean theorem and say that I have 12 squared plus 14 squared, and that has to equal our diameter squared. Right? So we know that 12 squared is 144, and 14 squared is 196. So we have 144 plus 196 is equal to d squared, and 144 plus 196 is going to be 340. So 340 is equal to d squared. And if we take the square root of that, the square root of 340 is going to equal d. Now, we can technically simplify that. 340 can be broken into the factor of 4 times 85. And if you take the square root of 4, you're going to get a 2. So we could say that d, which is the length of the diameter, is going to be 2 times the square root of 85. Well, I can't simplify the 85 any further, at least not as a perfect square. So the diameter is 2 times the square root of 85. Well, remember the radius is half of the diameter. So the radius has to be half of 2 square root of 85, which means the radius is just going to be equal to the square root of 85. That also means that when we go to our equation, I need to know r squared. So r squared is just going to be 85. Okay, so I know the radius, and I now know r squared. I need to find the center. Well, the center is going to be another right triangle. You can actually break it into 2 right triangles if you want. It has to be, if the total distance from the top of the triangle to the bottom of the triangle is 12, that means from the top to the middle, or the middle to the bottom, have to be 6. So what is 6 units below 9? Well, that would be a distance, that would be a y-coordinate of 3. And I know horizontally the distance is 14. Half of 14 would be 7. So from the left end to the right end has to be 7. Or from the middle to the right, or from the middle to the left has to be a distance of 7. So what is 7 units away from 10? That would be a 3 also. So the center is at the coordinate 3, 3. So I have everything I need now to figure out what the equation of our circle is. I know the radius is the square root of 85, and I know the center was 3, 3. And so if I plug that into my equation, I'm going to have x minus 3 quantity squared plus a y minus 3 quantity squared, and that's equal to r squared, which was 85. Okay, so again, I did this. I figured out the length of the diameter and the location of the center, just kind of thinking in terms of right triangles. We could just kind of use the distances in the right triangles to either to do the Pythagorean theorem and find the hypotenuse, or to figure out kind of what's in the middle, vertically and horizontally, and we could figure out the midpoint that way. Or you could just as easily use the midpoint and the distance formula. Okay, again, just to double check that, if we did the midpoint, the x coordinates are -4 and 10. So -4 plus 10 over 2. And the y coordinates are 9 plus a -3. And we're taking their average over 2. -4 plus 10 would be a 6. And 6 over 2 is 3. And if we do the y coordinates, 9 plus a -3 is 6. So 6 over 2 is also 3. So again, we still get 3, 3 as our midpoint, or as our midpoint of our diameter, which is our center. And if we did the same thing with the distance formula, we're going to have the square root of 10 minus a negative 4 squared plus negative 3 minus a 9 quantity squared. So that's going to be the square root of 14 squared plus a negative 12 squared. And so that's going to be the 196 plus the 144 square root. And that's going to turn out to be the same thing. It's going to give us that 2 square root of 85. And then we're just going to have to divide that by 2 to get the radius. So whether you do the midpoint and the distance formula or you think about it in terms of right triangles, you still get the same thing either way.